I never expected to become the most hated man in Pinehaven Estates, but that's exactly what happened when my mother passed away and left me her land. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. My mother, Anna Thompson, had died peacefully in her sleep at 73. I flew from Denver to Arizona the next day, my mind foggy with grief and the practicalities of funeral arrangements. Mom had been a tough woman, sharp as a tack until the very end, and she'd managed her affairs with the same precision she'd managed everything else in her life. Her lawyer, Gerald Hutchinson, met me at his office in Scottsdale 3 days after the funeral. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and the kind of steady demeanor that probably cost $200 an hour. "Keith Xavier, I presume," he said, shaking my hand. "That's me. Thanks for seeing me so quickly. Your mother was very specific about her wishes. Please, sit down." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, still wearing my funeral suit. The office smelled like old books and coffee. "Now, Keith, your mother's estate is quite straightforward in most respects. The house in Denver goes to your sister Caroline. Various accounts and investments are divided between you and your siblings. But there's one asset that goes entirely to you, and it's substantial." He pulled out a thick folder and opened it, revealing what looked like property deeds and survey maps. "Your mother owned 400 acres of land in Maricopa County. This land has been in her family since 1952, inherited from her father, your grandfather, Robert Thompson." I blinked. 400 acres? I knew Grandpa had some land out here, but I thought it was sold decades ago. "No, your mother retained ownership. And here's where it gets interesting." Gerald pulled out a map and spread it across the desk. In 1998, a development company called Sunset Ridge Developers approached your mother about purchasing the land. She declined. They returned in 1999 with a different proposal. "What kind of proposal?" "They wanted to build a gated community on the property. Your mother still didn't want to sell outright, but she agreed to a 99-year ground lease. The developers would pay her a monthly fee for the right to build on and develop the land, but she would retain ownership of the property itself." My brain was trying to process this information. "So the houses that are built there, they're on Mom's land?" "Your land now." "Yes. Pinehaven Estates, a gated community of 217 homes, sits entirely on property you now own. The ground lease is still active for another 72 years. "And they're paying rent for this," Gerald smiled. "Not exactly. Here's where your mother's cleverness truly shines. The original lease agreement stipulated that Sunset Ridge Developers would pay the ground rent. However, in 2003, the development company dissolved after completing the community. The lease terms specified that upon dissolution of the original lessee, responsibility for ground rent would transfer to the Homeowners Association." I sat forward. "The HOA pays the rent?" "Correct. Or more accurately, each homeowner pays a portion. The current annual ground rent is $480,000. Divided among all property owners, that's approximately $2,200 per household per year, paid monthly." My mouth went dry. "You're telling me I inherit $400,000 a year?" $480,000, adjusted annually for inflation as per the lease terms. Your mother was quite comfortable, Keith. She lived modestly, but this income has been steady for over 2 decades. I sat back, my head spinning. Does the HOA know about this? I mean, do the homeowners understand what they're paying for? Oh yes, it's disclosed in every property sale. The ground rent is separate from HOA dues, though the HOA manages collection and disbursement. It's all perfectly legal and properly documented. Why did Mom leave this specifically to me and not my siblings? Gerald's expression softened. She said you were the only one with a backbone strong enough to handle what comes with it. Her words, not mine. I should have paid more attention to that warning. The first month passed quietly. I returned to Denver, back to my job as a project manager for a construction firm, and tried to process my new reality. The money appeared in my account on the 1st of April, right on schedule. $40,000, like clockwork. Then the letters started arriving. The first one came from someone named Brenda Whitmore, president of the Pinehaven Estates Homeowners Association. It was printed on official letterhead, 3 pages long, and essentially demanded that I consider renegotiating the exploitative and burdensome ground rent agreement that unfairly targets hard-working homeowners. I called Gerald. Am I required to renegotiate? Absolutely not. The lease terms are ironclad. Your mother's lawyers made sure of that back in 1999. You can renegotiate if you choose to, but you're under no obligation. Then I think I'll pass. The second letter arrived a week later, this time more pointed. Brenda Whitmore suggested that my greed was causing undue hardship on families. She included a petition signed by 83 homeowners requesting I waive the ground rent entirely. I didn't respond to that one either. In May, my phone started ringing. I didn't recognize the Arizona number, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Brenda herself, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Xavier, this is Brenda Whitmore, HOA president of Pinehaven Estates. Your continued refusal to engage with our community regarding this rent situation is unacceptable. We have rights as homeowners, and we will not be extorted. Please contact me immediately. Extorted? I called Gerald again. They're using strong language, he said, but they have no legal ground to stand on. The lease exists. They agreed to its terms when they purchased their properties. This isn't extortion, it's a contractual obligation. Should I be worried? I'd stay alert. HOA boards can be aggressive, especially when money's involved, but legally, you're completely protected. I decided to visit Pinehaven Estates myself in June. I took a week off work and flew back to Arizona, renting a car and driving out to see exactly what I'd inherited. The community was impressive, I had to admit. The gate was manned by a security guard who checked a list before letting visitors through. Inside, the streets were pristine, lined with mature desert landscaping. The homes were large, mostly Pueblo-style architecture with terracotta roofs, probably ranging from 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. This wasn't a modest middle-class neighborhood. These were expensive properties. I drove slowly through the winding streets, getting a feel for the place. There was a community center, a large pool complex, tennis courts, and what looked like a small park. My mother's land, and it had been transformed into something substantial. I parked near the community center and walked around. A woman in her 50s with short blonde hair and an athletic build approached me. She wore white capris and a turquoise blouse, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Can I help you? Are you lost? Just looking around. I'm Keith Xavier. Her smile vanished completely. Anna Thompson's son. That's right. I'm Brenda Whitmore. I've been trying to reach you. I got your letters and your voicemail. And you didn't have the courtesy to respond? Her voice was sharp now, the pleasant facade gone. I didn't see anything that required a response. The lease agreement is clear. The lease agreement is robbery. $200 a month might not seem like much to you, but it adds up. That's money that could go toward our children's education, our retirement funds, our futures. With respect, Ms. Whitmore, that's not my problem. When people bought homes here, they agreed to these terms. Her face flushed red. How dare you? You're sitting in Denver collecting nearly $500,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing, while we're the ones who actually live here, who maintain this community, who pay for security and landscaping and amenities. Which is what HOA dues are for. The ground rent is separate. It's unconscionable. It's legal. A small crowd had started to gather. I could feel the hostility radiating from them like heat off asphalt. A man in his 40s stepped forward. You should be ashamed of yourself. My wife and I pay over $15,000 a year just to live in our own home. Property taxes, HOA dues, and now this rent to you. It's bleeding us dry. Then perhaps you should sell, I said more harshly than I intended. The crowd murmured angrily. Brenda stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. You don't want to make enemies here, Mr. Xavier. This is a tight-knit community, and we look out for each other. If you insist on bleeding us dry, we'll find ways to make this very unpleasant for you. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. We will fight this. We have lawyers, too. I looked around at the crowd, maybe 20 people now, all glaring at me with open hostility. I suddenly understood what my mother meant about needing a backbone. Good luck with your lawyers, I said, and walked back to my car. The next month, the payment didn't arrive. I called Gerald on July 2nd. The ground rent wasn't deposited. That's a breach of contract. Let me contact the HOA directly." He called me back that afternoon. I spoke with Brenda Whitmore and the HOA's attorney, a man named Philip Davidson. They're claiming the lease is invalid due to something they call unconscionable terms. They filed a lawsuit to void the agreement. Can they do that? They can file anything they want. Winning is another matter. The lease has been active and unchallenged for 27 years. Courts don't typically void long-standing agreements without extraordinary cause, but will need to respond. This is insane. Welcome to HOA warfare. These organizations can be ruthless. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court. I had to hire a local attorney to work with Gerald, a woman named Patricia Mendez who specialized in property law. The legal fees started adding up immediately. The good news, Patricia told me over the phone, is that we're on extremely solid legal ground. The lease was properly executed, recorded, and disclosed. Every homeowner signed documents acknowledging the ground rent obligation when they purchased their property. And the bad news? This could take months or even years to fully resolve, and in the meantime, they're not paying. We can seek immediate relief through the courts, but that takes time too. I flew back to Arizona for the preliminary hearing in August. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was busy, and the air conditioning was working overtime against the brutal summer heat. Brenda Whitmore sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with Philip Davidson, her attorney. She wore a navy blue suit and a satisfied expression that made me want to punch something. The judge, a woman named Margaret Rosales, reviewed the documents with a skeptical eye. She was in her 60s with dark hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mr. Davidson, you're arguing the lease terms are unconscionable." "Yes, Your Honor. The ground rent represents an excessive and unfair burden on the homeowners, who had little choice but to accept these terms when purchasing their properties." "But they did accept the terms, correct? This was disclosed?" "Technically yes, but technically yes or actually yes?" Davidson shifted. "Actually yes, Your Honor, but the amount is excessive." Judge Rosales looked at Patricia. "Ms. Mendez?" "Your Honor, the lease has been in effect since 1999. It's been paid consistently for over 2 decades. The terms were negotiated at arm's length between sophisticated parties. The ground rent amount represents roughly 0.5% of average property values in the community, which is well within standard ranges for ground lease arrangements. This is simply a case of buyer's remorse manifesting as litigation." The judge nodded slowly. "I'm inclined to agree. Mr. Davidson, your unconscionability argument is weak at best. These homeowners are not unsophisticated buyers. Properties in Pinehaven Estates sell for between $600,000 and over $1 million. The ground rent is disclosed. What exactly is unconscionable here?" "The fact that Mr. Xavier provides no value in exchange for the rent, Your Honor. He provides the land counselor. That's the entire point of a ground lease." I tried not to smile. Judge Rosales continued. "I'm going to order the HOA to resume payments immediately. The underlying lawsuit can proceed, but in the meantime, the status quo must be maintained. That means paying the ground rent as stipulated in the lease. We'll schedule a full hearing for October." Brenda's face went purple with rage. As we filed out of the courtroom, she cornered me in the hallway. "You think you've won? This isn't over. The judge seems to think I've won. We'll appeal. We'll take this all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to." "That's your right, but you'll be paying the rent while you do it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this." "Is that another threat?" "It's a promise." Patricia pulled me away before I could respond. "Don't engage with her. Let the legal process work." The ground rent resumed in September, along with a late fee I hadn't even asked for, but that was apparently built into the lease terms. An extra $5,000 for the missed payment in July. That's when things got weird. I started receiving strange emails. Anonymous accounts sending messages like, "You're stealing from families, and karma is coming for you." My phone number somehow ended up on a website called Corporate Landlord Shame List, along with an exaggerated description of the situation that made me sound like some kind of robber baron. Then someone created a Facebook page called Justice for Pinehaven Residents that posted my photo, my address in Denver, and details about my employer. The page called for a boycott of the construction company I worked for. I contacted the police in Denver. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but limited in what he could do. Unless someone makes a direct threat or commits a crime, there's not much we can do about online harassment. You could pursue a civil case for defamation. Another lawsuit, more legal fees. I was starting to understand why my mother had lived so modestly despite her income. My boss called me into his office in late September. "Keith, I need to talk to you about something sensitive." My stomach dropped. The Facebook page. "We've been getting calls, angry people saying they won't work with us if we employ you. I know it's not your fault, but it's affecting business." "Are you firing me?" "No, but I need you to resolve this situation. Can you do that?" "I'm trying. It's in court." "Then keep trying. Because if this continues to impact the company, I'll have to reconsider your position here." I left his office feeling sick. This was spiraling out of control. The full hearing in October was more of the same. Patricia presented documents, contracts, disclosures, and precedents. Davidson argued a motion in fairness. Judge Rosales ruled in my favor, denying the HOA's motion to void the lease. "The contract is valid and enforceable," she said from the bench. "The plaintiffs have failed to demonstrate any legal basis for voiding an agreement that has been in force for over 2 decades. Case dismissed." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. Because Brenda Whitmore looked at me across the courtroom with such pure hatred that I knew this wasn't over. She appealed immediately. More delays, more legal fees, more months of harassment. In November, someone slashed the tires on my car in Denver. No witnesses, no cameras, no leads. The police report went nowhere. In December, I received a certified letter from the IRS informing me I was being audited. Coincidence? Maybe. But the timing felt suspicious. January brought a new tactic. The HOA stopped paying again, claiming they were waiting for the appeal to be heard. Patricia filed for contempt of court, and Judge Rosales was not happy. "This is the second time the defendant has failed to honor this court's orders," she said in February. "Ms. Whitmore, as HOA president, you are personally responsible for ensuring compliance with court orders. Continued refusal will result in sanctions, including possible jail time for contempt." Brenda actually stood up in court. "You can't put me in jail for standing up to extortion." "Sit down, Ms. Whitmore," the judge snapped, "and I absolutely can hold you in contempt. One more outburst, and I'll do it right now." The payments resumed again, but the hostility had reached a fever pitch. The Facebook page now had over 3,000 followers. I was getting death threats in my email. Someone left a dead rat on my doorstep in Denver. I called Gerald. "This is getting dangerous. What can I do?" "Document everything. File police reports. Consider a restraining order against Brenda Whitmore specifically." "Will that help?" "Probably not, but it creates a paper trail." In March, exactly 1 year after my mother's death, the Arizona Court of Appeals issued its ruling. They affirmed Judge Rosales' decision. The lease was valid. The ground rent was enforceable. The HOA had no grounds for relief. Patricia called me with the news. "This is as final as it gets unless they want to try the Arizona Supreme Court, which won't hear it. You've won, Keith." Then why don't I feel like I've won? Because winning in court and winning in life are different things. Be careful out there. The next month, something changed. The ground rent arrived on schedule, but with it came a letter from a new HOA president. Brenda Whitmore had been voted out. The new president was a man named Douglas Pemberton. His letter was professional and conciliatory. "Dear Mr. Xavier, I want to introduce myself as the new president of the Pinehaven Estates HOA. I recognize that the relationship between our community and you has been contentious. I'd like to propose a meeting to discuss a path forward that works for everyone." I was skeptical, but curious. I called him. "Mr. Xavier, thank you for calling," he said. His voice was calm, educated, reasonable. "I'm not Brenda Whitmore. I don't think you're the enemy, but I do think we need to find a better arrangement." "The arrangement exists. It's called a lease." "I understand, but hear me out. What if we proposed purchasing the land outright? We'd pay fair market value. You'd get a substantial lump sum, and we'd eliminate this ongoing conflict." "How much are you thinking?" "We had an appraisal done. 400 acres of developed land in this area with existing infrastructure and premium location is worth approximately $40 million. We'd be willing to offer $35 million, paid over 5 years to make it manageable. I did the math quickly. $40,000 a month was $480,000 a year. Over 72 years remaining on the lease, that was about $35 million, not accounting for inflation adjustments. So you're offering me the equivalent of what I'd make anyway, but paid faster and with no inflation protection? Douglas sighed. We're trying to find middle ground here. I appreciate that, but the answer is no. The lease terms include inflation adjustments. In 20 years, that ground rent will be much higher. In 40 years, higher still. You're asking me to take a worse deal to solve a problem that isn't my problem. Keith, can I call you Keith? Sure. Keith, these are people's homes. Families live here. Children. The ground rent is a burden that affects real people's lives. I understand that. But those people bought homes knowing the terms. This isn't my fault. But you could be part of the solution. By taking less money than I'm entitled to? That's not a solution. That's me being a sucker. The call ended politely but without resolution. In May, I got a surprise visit in Denver. Someone knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. I opened it to find a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Keith Xavier? Yes? My name is Amanda Tucker. I own a home in Pinehaven Estates. Can I talk to you for a few minutes? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. She sat in my living room, clutching her purse like a life preserver. I promise I'm not here to yell at you or threaten you. I just wanted to talk, person to person. Okay. My husband and I bought our house in Pinehaven 7 years ago. We knew about the ground rent. We factored it into our budget. It's not fun to pay, but it's part of the deal. So what's the problem? The problem is Brenda Whitmore and people like her have made this into a war. They've sued you, harassed you, tried to make you the villain. And now our property values are suffering because no one wants to buy into a community with this kind of conflict. I'm sorry about that. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for your help. How can I help? Amanda pulled out a folder. There are about 60 families in Pinehaven who feel the way I do. We're forming a separate organization, distinct from the HOA. We want to propose something different. I'm listening. What if we agreed to pay the ground rent for the full duration of the lease, but you agreed to cap the inflation adjustments at 3% annually instead of the full CPI increase? I thought about it. The lease currently adjusted annually based on the Consumer Price Index, which had been running at 4 to 5% recently. Capping it at 3% would cost me money in the long run, but not as much as some other proposals. In exchange for what? In exchange for peace, we'd get commitments from the entire community to stop the harassment, the lawsuits, the social media campaigns. We'd create a formal agreement that protects you from future legal challenges. Can you guarantee that? We can get 60 families to sign on immediately. That's more than a quarter of the community. We'd work on the others. I shook my head. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Amanda, but I can't make concessions based on promises to stop illegal behavior. The harassment should stop because it's wrong and illegal, not because I give up money I'm entitled to. Her face fell. So you won't negotiate at all? Not on those terms. She stood to leave. Then this is never going to end. Maybe not, but I'm not going to reward bad behavior by accepting less than I'm owed. After she left, I sat in my living room feeling like the villain everyone accused me of being, but I also knew I was right. You don't negotiate with terrorists, and you don't give up legal rights because people are angry about them. Summer brought another development. The HOA filed a new lawsuit, this time claiming that I was required to maintain the land and that failure to do so constituted breach of contract. Patricia laughed when she read the complaint. This is absurd. The lease specifically states that the lessee is responsible for all development and maintenance. They're grasping at straws. So we fight it? We file a motion to dismiss. It won't even make it to trial. She was right. The motion was dismissed in August with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile the same claim. But the harassment continued. More emails, more threats, more angry phone calls from blocked numbers. In September, Something finally broke. I got a call from Detective Sarah Williams of the Scottsdale Police Department. Mr. Xavier, I'm investigating a series of crimes that may be connected to your situation with Pinehaven Estates. My heart raced. What kind of crimes? We've identified Brenda Whitmore as the administrator of the Facebook page that's been posting your personal information. We've also traced several threatening emails back to her IP address, and we have a witness who claims she solicited him to vandalize your property in Denver. She hired someone to slash my tires? Possibly. We're still investigating, but I wanted to let you know we're taking this seriously. Cyberstalking, harassment, and conspiracy to commit vandalism are all crimes. What happens now? We're building a case. I'll keep you informed. 2 weeks later, Brenda Whitmore was arrested at her home in Pinehaven Estates. The charges included cyberstalking, criminal harassment, and conspiracy to commit criminal damage. The local news covered it extensively. I watched the news coverage from my apartment in Denver. Brenda being led away in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage. Neighbors being interviewed, some supporting her, others condemning her. One neighbor said, "She went too far. We're angry about the rent, but you can't break the law." Another said, "This is what happens when good people are pushed to their breaking point by corporate greed." I wasn't a corporation. I was just a guy who inherited land. The arrest changed things. The Facebook page was taken down. The emails stopped. The phone calls ceased. It was like someone had flipped a switch. In October, Douglas Pemberton called again. "Keith, I want to apologize on behalf of the community. What Brenda did was wrong. We should have stopped it earlier." "Thank you. I appreciate that. Can we try again? Not to renegotiate the lease, but to establish a working relationship? We're going to be connected for the next 7 decades. We should find a way to make it work." I'm open to that. What if we created a community fund? A portion of the ground rent could be directed back into Pinehaven for improvements that benefit everyone. Better security, upgraded amenities, things like that. That's an interesting idea, but who controls the fund? We could set up an independent board. You'd have a seat, we'd have representatives, and we'd make decisions together. I thought about it. I'd want it in writing, formal agreements about how the money is used. Absolutely. Over the next several months, we negotiated a community partnership agreement. I would continue to receive the full ground rent, but I agreed to contribute $50,000 annually to a community improvement fund. In exchange, the HOA agreed to several things: no more legal challenges to the lease, active prevention of harassment or threats against me, and quarterly meetings to maintain open communication. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Brenda Whitmore's trial took place in March of the following year. I attended as a witness. She sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, her lawyer arguing that she'd been under tremendous stress and that her actions, while wrong, were understandable given the circumstances. The prosecution presented email logs, Facebook posts, and testimony from the man she'd approached about vandalizing my car. He'd been arrested for the tire slashing and cut a deal to testify against her. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and restitution to me for the cost of the legal fees related to the harassment. As she was led out of the courtroom, she looked at me one last time. Not with hatred this time, but with something like exhaustion. She'd fought her war and lost everything in the process. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. The ground rent arrived every month like clockwork. The Community Improvement Fund paid for new security cameras, renovated tennis courts, and an upgraded playground. I visited Pinehaven Estates twice a year for board meetings, where we discussed maintenance issues and future improvements. Some residents still resented me. I could see it in their eyes when I drove through the community, but most had accepted the reality. The lease existed. The rent was legal. Fighting it had only made things worse. Amanda Tucker became a friend of sorts. She'd been elected to the HOA board and often called me to discuss community issues. She invited me to neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. I attended a few, though it was always awkward being the landlord at a gathering of tenants. At one Christmas party in December, a man approached me with a beer in hand. "You're Xavier, right?" That's me. I'm Tom Richards. I've lived here for 12 years. I just wanted to say I get it now. Get what? Why you wouldn't back down. It's your property. You didn't force anyone to buy here. We all made our choices. Brenda turned it into something personal, but it never should have been. I appreciate that. My wife still thinks you're a jerk, for the record. He grinned. But she thinks everyone's a jerk, so don't take it personally. I laughed. It felt good to laugh about it. In the spring, I got an unexpected call from Gerald. Keith, I have some interesting news. A commercial developer wants to meet with you about a portion of your land. What portion? The southeastern corner, about 20 acres. It borders the main road and could be developed commercially. They're proposing a long-term lease for retail and office space. Would that affect Pinehaven? Not directly. It's outside the gates, but it could increase your income substantially. I thought about my mother, about how she'd played the long game with this land. She could have sold it in 1999 for probably $5 million. Instead, she'd structured a deal that had generated over $10 million so far and would generate tens of millions more. Set up the meeting, I said. The commercial development became another source of income. A 20-year lease for a small shopping center that included a grocery store, a coffee shop, some restaurants, and professional offices. Another $30,000 a month. I quit my job at the construction company. I didn't need it anymore, and the harassment from the previous years had soured the relationship anyway. Instead, I started a property management company to handle my growing portfolio of leases and investments. I moved to Scottsdale permanently in 2028, buying a house near Pinehaven, but not inside it. I wanted to be close enough to manage the relationship with the community, but far enough to maintain some separation. My sister Caroline thought I was crazy. You're going to spend your life dealing with people who hate you? Most of them don't hate me anymore, and the ones who do, well, they'll get over it or they won't. Mom would be proud of you, or amused. Probably both. She was right. My mother had understood something I was only beginning to grasp, that ownership isn't just about having things. It's about the responsibility that comes with them. She'd owned this land for decades and used it wisely. Now it was my turn. The years that followed brought more changes to Pinehaven Estates. Property values increased as the commercial development brought new amenities to the area. The conflict became part of the community's history, a story people told new residents about the time the HOA went to war with the landlord and lost. Douglas Pemberton remained HOA president for years, and we developed a good working relationship. We didn't always agree, but we respected each other. The quarterly meetings became routine, sometimes boring, always necessary. In 2030, I got married. My wife, Emily, was a real estate attorney I'd met through business dealings. She understood the situation with Pinehaven better than anyone. You know, people are going to say I married you for your money, she said when I proposed. Are you marrying me for my money? No, I'm marrying you despite your money, because it comes with a whole community of people who think you're either a genius or a villain. Which do you think I am? Neither. You're just a guy who inherited land and refused to be bullied into giving it away. That was the best description I'd ever heard. We bought a bigger house and settled into life in Arizona. Emily's practice grew. My property management company expanded to handle other clients' ground leases and complex property arrangements. The income from Pinehaven and the commercial development provided security and freedom. In 2032, on the 10th anniversary of my mother's death, I visited her grave in Scottsdale. The headstone was simple. Anna Thompson, 1951-2022, beloved mother and grandmother. I stood there in the desert heat, thinking about everything that had happened. The lawsuits, the harassment, the arrest, the slow building of peace. All of it could be traced back to her decision to lease rather than sell, to play the long game rather than take the quick profit. You were right, I said to the headstone. I needed a backbone for this. Thanks for thinking I had one. A gust of wind kicked up desert dust. I like to think it was her laughing. Life in Pinehaven Estates continued. Families moved in and out. Children grew up and went to college. The tennis courts got replaced again. The security system was upgraded to include facial recognition technology. The ground rent increased annually with inflation, now up to about $600,000 a year. I attended community events, donated to local schools, sponsored youth sports teams. I wanted to be more than just the guy who collected rent. I wanted to be part of the community, even if my role would always be unique. In 2035, Amanda Tucker's daughter graduated from high school. Amanda invited me to the graduation party. "Thank you for coming," she said, hugging me at the door. "Katie's going to Arizona State University in the fall." "That's wonderful. You must be proud." "I am, and I wanted you to know something. That college fund we've been building? We were able to save enough partly because we refinanced our mortgage at a lower rate and used some of the savings. If we'd been fighting you in court all these years, if we'd been spending money on legal fees and stress, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So thank you." "For what?" "For not backing down. For teaching us that sometimes the world doesn't change just because we're angry about it. Katie learned that lesson too. She's studying business law. She says she wants to understand how contracts work so she can help people make better decisions." I felt something shift in my chest. Pride, maybe, or validation. "Tell her to call me when she graduates. I might have an internship opportunity." Amanda smiled. She'd like that. The sun set over Pinehaven Estates that evening, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. I stood in Amanda's backyard, watching families celebrate together, kids running around with cake on their faces, adults laughing and sharing stories. This was what my mother's land had become. Not just houses and streets and amenities, but a place where people lived their lives, where they raised children and built memories and fought over HOA fees and ground rent and everything else that comes with home ownership. I thought about Brenda Whitmore sometimes. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd moved away after her probation ended, relocated to Nevada to be near her daughter. I hoped she'd found peace. The anger had eaten her alive, turned her into someone who committed crimes and lost everything. I didn't hate her. I actually felt sorry for her. In 2036, the commercial development expanded. The developer wanted to add a hotel and conference center on an adjacent parcel. More negotiations, more contracts, more monthly income. The property management company now employed 15 people and managed over 50 properties across Arizona. Emily and I had 2 kids by then, a daughter named Sophie and a son named Marcus. We talked about what would happen to the land when I died, how to structure things so they wouldn't face the same battles I had. "Maybe we put it in a trust," Emily suggested. "Clear terms, professional management, remove the personal element. Or maybe we teach them what Grandma taught me. That ownership means responsibility, that you don't back down when you're right, even when it's hard." "You can do both," she said. She was right. We could do both. In the fall of 2036, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Brenda Whitmore. "Dear Keith," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to even read this letter. But I needed to write it anyway. I was wrong. Not about the ground rent being expensive or frustrating, but about how I handled it. I let anger consume me. I convinced myself you were the enemy, and I did terrible things because of it. I broke the law. I hurt people. I hurt myself. I've spent the last few years in therapy working through why I reacted that way. My therapist says I have control issues, that I can't handle situations where I'm not in charge. That sounds about right. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not for opposing you or disagreeing with you, but for the harassment, the threats, the criminal behavior. That was wrong. You were just enforcing a contract you inherited. I made it personal when it never should have been. I hope you're doing well. I hope the community has found peace. I hope maybe someday I'll find it too. Sincerely, Brenda Whitmore. I read the letter 3 times, then showed it to Emily. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me thinks I should respond." "What does your gut say?" My gut said to respond. So I did. "Dear Brenda," I wrote, "thank you for your letter. Apology accepted. I hope you found peace in Nevada. What happened was hard for everyone, but we all survived it. The community is doing well. I'm doing well. I wish you the best. Keith." Short, simple, honest. I mailed it the next day. Whether she received it or what she thought about it, I never knew. But writing it felt like closing a chapter. The years continued to roll by. Pinehaven Estates celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2039. There was a big party at the community center, a historical display showing the development from bare desert to thriving neighborhood. Photos from the early 2000s, newspaper articles about the growth of the area, and yes, even a section about the legal battle over the ground lease. Douglas Pemberton, now retired from the HOA board, gave a speech. This community has been through a lot. We've had our conflicts, our challenges, our growing pains. But we've also learned something important, that we're all connected, whether we like it or not. The ground beneath our feet belongs to Keith Xavier, and that's not going to change in our lifetimes. We can fight that reality or we can accept it and build something good anyway. I'm glad we chose to build. People applauded. I stood in the back of the room, Emily beside me, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Belonging. After the speech, young people approached me, teenagers and young adults who'd grown up in Pinehaven. They asked questions about the land, about my mother, about the legal battles they'd heard stories about but hadn't lived through. One young man, maybe 20 years old, said, "My dad still complains about the ground rent every month, but he also says you taught him something about reading contracts before signing them. He's made sure I understand that lesson." "That's a good lesson," I said. "Yeah, I'm studying real estate development at ASU. I want to understand how all this works." "The world needs people who understand how things work. Will you hire me when I graduate?" He grinned. "Send me your resume, we'll see." As the party wound down, I walked through Pinehaven Estates one more time. The streets I'd driven down that first time in 2022 when Brenda Whitmore had confronted me and I'd felt like an invader in a hostile territory. Now I knew these streets. I knew the families behind the doors. I knew their stories. The ground belonged to me, but the community belonged to them. That distinction mattered. Emily found me standing near the entrance gate, looking back at the neighborhood. "What are you thinking about?" "My mom, wishing she could see this." "Maybe she can. Maybe." We drove home as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting everything in gold and shadow. The ground rent would arrive next month, like it always did. The commercial lease payments would come too. The property management company would continue to grow. Life would go on. I'd inherited 400 acres and a complicated legacy. I'd been sued, harassed, threatened, and demonized. I'd stood my ground when everyone told me to back down. I'd made enemies, and eventually, slowly, built something like peace. My mother had been right. It took a backbone to handle this inheritance, but it also took patience, wisdom, and the willingness to be hated for doing what was right. As we pulled into our driveway, I thought about the next generation. Sophie and Marcus would inherit this land someday. They'd face their own challenges, their own conflicts, their own decisions about what to do with property that came with strings attached. But they'd also have the benefit of history. They'd know what happened when the HOA went to war with the landlord. They'd know that standing firm on principle can lead to years of conflict, but eventually, usually, probably, the truth wins out. The lease had 72 years remaining when I inherited it. Now it had 61. By the time it expired in 2098, I'd be long gone. My children might still be alive, old themselves, facing the decision of whether to renew or sell or do something else entirely. That was a problem for another day, another generation, another time. For now, I had a family to care for, a business to run, a community to work with, and 400 acres of Arizona desert that would keep generating income for decades to come. I thought about all the people who'd told me to give up the lease, to sell the land, to make peace by making concessions. They'd been wrong. Not because peace wasn't important, but because peace built on surrender isn't real peace. It's just delayed conflict. Real peace came from standing firm, weathering the storm, and eventually finding common ground without compromising core principles. It took years. It cost money and stress and relationships. But in the end, it was worth it. Every homeowner in Pinehaven Estates paid me ground rent. They'd pay my children after me. They'd pay my grandchildren after that. Not because I was cruel or greedy, but because my mother was smart enough to structure a deal that protected our family's interests for generations. That was the real inheritance. Not the money, though the money was nice. The real inheritance was the lesson that property rights matter, that contracts mean something, and that backing down in the face of anger and threats isn't noble. It's just weak. I'd never asked to become the most hated man in Pinehaven Estates, but I'd learned to live with it, then work through it, and finally, mostly move past it. The ground beneath that gated community belonged to me. The homes belonged to them. And somehow together, we'd figured out how to make it work. That was enough. That was everything. That was the story of how a widow's inheritance became a battlefield, then became a lesson, and finally became just another part of life in suburban Arizona, where families lived and children grew, and the desert sun beat down on 400 acres that would belong to my family until 2098. No matter how many HOA boards came and went, no matter how many angry letters arrived, no matter what, the land was ours, the lease was valid, the rent was due, and life, complicated and messy and occasionally beautiful, went on.